Black police officer lies about white woman in court not knowing she's a decorated Army Ranger commander. You made a critical error, Officer Reynolds. The truth has a way of revealing itself. The hushed whispers fell silent as Judge Eleanor Palmer entered the courtroom, her black robe flowing behind her like a shadow. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the worn oak benches where spectators sat shoulder to shoulder, their collective breath creating a palpable tension in the air. Outside, rain pelted against the tall windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the drama about to unfold. Among those seated was Samantha Wilson, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her posture unnaturally straight as if an invisible thread pulled her spine upward. She wore a simple gray blazer over a white blouse, her clothing deliberately understated. Her blue eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room systematically, taking mental notes of each face, each movement. To the casual observer, she might have appeared nervous, just another defendant awaiting judgment. But those who looked closer noticed something different, a quiet confidence, an unusual stillness that seemed out of place for someone facing serious criminal charges. All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Palmer, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. The spectators rose as Judge Palmer, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes that had seen decades of lies and truths, took her seat at the bench. She adjusted her glasses and surveyed the courtroom with the weary resignation of someone who had presided over too many cases she'd rather forget. "Be seated," she commanded, and the rustle of movement filled the room momentarily before settling back into tense silence. Officer Darnell Reynolds sat at the plaintiff's table, adjusting his perfectly pressed uniform. His dark skin contrasted with the crisp blue of his police attire, and a gleam of satisfaction played at the corners of his mouth. He exuded the kind of confidence that came from years of having his word accepted without question. As he leaned over to whisper something to the prosecutor, his eyes flickered toward Samantha, and a subtle smirk crossed his face. "The state versus Samantha Wilson," the bailiff announced, his voice flat and official. Samantha rose smoothly from her seat, each movement deliberate and controlled, and stood facing the judge. Next to her, her attorney, Michael Torres, shuffled through his papers nervously. Torres was young, perhaps only a few years out of law school, with warm brown skin and a meticulously trimmed beard. Though his suit was well-tailored, his fingers trembled slightly as he arranged his notes, and he glanced at Samantha as if seeking reassurance. She didn't return his look. Her focus remained on Judge Palmer, her expression revealing nothing. "Are the parties ready to proceed?" Judge Palmer asked, her tone making it clear she expected nothing less. "Yes, Your Honor," replied District Attorney Victor Harmon, a man in his 50s with salt-and-pepper hair and a reputation for being relentless. His designer suit and confident demeanor suggested he had never expected anything but victory in this courtroom. "The defense is ready, Your Honor," Torres said, his voice steadier than his hands. Judge Palmer nodded. "Very well. Mr. Harmon, call your first witness." "The state calls Officer Darnell Reynolds to the stand," Harmon announced. Officer Reynolds rose from his seat with a deliberate slowness, adjusting his badge and straightening his already perfect tie. Every move seemed calculated, as if he were performing for an audience far beyond the courtroom walls. As he walked to the witness stand, he paused briefly to glance at Samantha, the corner of his mouth turning up in a barely perceptible smirk. After being sworn in, Reynolds settled into the witness chair with the ease of someone who had testified many times before. Samantha watched him intently, noting the subtle tap of his index finger against his thigh, the slight adjustment of his posture as he leaned toward the microphone. "Officer Reynolds," Harmon began, "please tell the court about the evening of January 17th and your encounter with the defendant, Ms. Wilson." Reynolds cleared his throat and began speaking in a clear, authoritative voice. "I was on patrol in the West Side neighborhood, responding to reports of suspicious activity. At approximately 9:45 p.m., I observed Ms. Wilson standing outside a closed business on Maple Avenue. The courtroom was completely silent now, all eyes fixed on the officer. I approached her and asked what she was doing there at that hour," Reynolds continued. "She immediately became confrontational, refusing to identify herself or explain her presence." Samantha's expression remained unchanged, though Torres scribbled something frantically on his notepad. "When I attempted to question her further," Reynolds said, his voice taking on a tone of practiced regret, "she became increasingly hostile. When I tried to de-escalate the situation, she physically assaulted me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Samantha remained perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Reynolds. "Could you describe this assault?" Harmon asked, moving closer to the jury box. Reynolds shifted in his seat, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest. "She struck me in the chest with considerable force. Then, most alarmingly, she attempted to reach for my service weapon." Gasps erupted from the spectators. Judge Palmer struck her gavel once, the sharp sound cutting through the noise. At that point, Reynolds continued, I had no choice but to physically restrain her to protect myself and potentially others in the area. From somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a voice muttered, that doesn't sound right. Heads turned, but Judge Palmer quickly restored order with another tap of her gavel. Thank you, Officer Reynolds, Harmon said, looking pleased. No further questions at this time. Judge Palmer turned to Torres. Your cross-examination, Mr. Torres? Torres rose, straightening his tie. I'd like to reserve my cross-examination for later, Your Honor, if that's acceptable. Very well, Judge Palmer replied. Mr. Harmon, call your next witness. As the prosecution continued presenting its case, Samantha leaned slightly toward Torres and whispered, remember what we discussed. Focus on the facts. Torres nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Samantha had recognized his nervousness from the moment he'd taken her case, a public defender assigned to her when she declined to hire private counsel. He was smart and well-intentioned but inexperienced, especially in a case that was rapidly attracting local media attention. Through the afternoon, the prosecution built its case. Officer Reynolds, a decorated police officer with 15 years on the force, had encountered a belligerent woman who had assaulted him while he was performing his duties. They presented his medical report indicating bruising, statements from officers who arrived at the scene after the arrest, and Reynolds' spotless record of community service. Each piece of evidence seemed to tighten the noose around Samantha's neck, yet her demeanor never changed. She took notes occasionally, whispering instructions to Torres, but otherwise remained a study in composure. When court adjourned for the day, the spectators filed out, many throwing curious or condemning glances at Samantha. She ignored them all, gathering her things methodically. Ms. Wilson, Torres said quietly as they prepared to leave, the prosecution has built a strong case. I think we should consider the plea deal they offered this morning. Samantha looked at him, her eyes suddenly intense. No deals, Mr. Torres. Tomorrow, we present our case exactly as planned. But the evidence is incomplete, she finished for him. Trust me, the truth is going to come out tomorrow, and Officer Reynolds knows it. Did you notice how his left hand kept twitching whenever he mentioned the alleged assault? How he couldn't maintain eye contact when describing how I supposedly reached for his weapon? Torres looked surprised. I didn't catch that. That's why I'm here and he's there, Samantha said, nodding toward Reynolds, who was being congratulated by fellow officers near the courtroom door. We'll be ready tomorrow, Mr. Torres. Get some rest. As they parted ways outside the courthouse, rain still falling steadily, Torres couldn't help but wonder about the woman he was defending. Accused of assaulting a police officer, she displayed none of the anxiety or fear he'd come to expect from his clients. Instead, she exuded a calm confidence that was almost unnerving. What he didn't know, what almost no one in that courtroom knew, was that Samantha Wilson was about to turn the entire case upside down. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the high windows of the courtroom, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. The gallery was even more crowded than the previous day, word having spread about the case. Local journalists occupied the back row, pens poised over notepads. Samantha entered wearing a similar outfit to the day before, professional, understated, nothing that would draw unnecessary attention. She took her seat beside Torres, who looked as if he hadn't slept well. Are you ready? She asked him quietly. Before he could answer, Judge Palmer entered, and the court was called to order. Mr. Torres, the judge said once everyone was seated, you may present your case. Torres stood, noticeably steadier than the day before. Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Samantha Wilson to the stand. A murmur ran through the courtroom as Samantha rose and walked to the witness stand. She moved with a deliberate grace, her steps measured and confident. After being sworn in, she sat with perfect posture, hands resting lightly on her lap. Torres approached her, his nervousness from the previous day less apparent. Ms. Wilson, could you please tell the court about your encounter with Officer Reynolds on the night in question? Samantha leaned slightly toward the microphone. I had been visiting a friend in the West Side neighborhood. I was walking back to my car when I realized I wasn't sure of the exact route. I stopped under a streetlight to check the map on my phone. Her voice was clear and measured, carrying easily to every corner of the courtroom. That's when Officer Reynolds approached me. He shined his flashlight directly in my face, making it difficult to see him. He asked what I was doing there, his tone immediately confrontational. Harmon shifted in his seat but didn't object. I explained I was checking directions on my phone. He demanded identification. I asked if I had done something wrong, as I wasn't aware that checking one's phone on a public sidewalk was illegal. Torres nodded encouragingly. How did Officer Reynolds respond to this? He became agitated, Samantha continued. He told me I was being uncooperative and that he could arrest me if I didn't comply immediately. I began to reach for my ID, explaining that I simply wanted to understand why I was being detained. She paused, her eyes briefly meeting Reynolds, who looked away. Before I could retrieve my ID, he grabbed my arm, she said. I told him he was hurting me and asked him to let go. He responded by saying, and I quote, "People like you need to learn to respect authority." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Judge Palmer tapped her gavel lightly. He then twisted my arm behind my back, Samantha continued, and slammed me against his patrol car. At no point did I resist, and I certainly never struck him or reached for his weapon. Torres walked closer to the jury box. Ms. Wilson, Officer Reynolds testified that his body camera malfunctioned during this encounter. Do you have any comment on that? A hint of a smile touched Samantha's lips. It seems remarkably convenient that the one piece of evidence that would clearly show what happened mysteriously malfunctioned, doesn't it? Objection. Harmon called out. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Palmer said. The jury will disregard the defendant's last comment. Torres nodded. Ms. Wilson, the prosecution has portrayed you as an ordinary civilian who suddenly became violent when approached by a police officer. Is there anything about your background that might be relevant to this case? Samantha's eyes met Torres, and for the first time, a flicker of something, determination, perhaps, crossed her face. Yes, she said simply. There is. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. I am Commander Samantha Wilson of the United States Army Rangers. I served our country for 16 years, including multiple combat deployments in some of the most dangerous regions of the world. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Judge Palmer seemed momentarily speechless, her pen frozen above her notepad. In the gallery, journalists frantically scribbled notes, and at the prosecution table, Harmon's expression darkened. Officer Reynolds' composure finally cracked, his eyes widening in unmistakable shock. Torres allowed the revelation to hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Commander Wilson, given your military background, were you trained to handle high-pressure confrontations? Extensively, Samantha replied. My training included conflict de-escalation, defensive tactics, and maintaining composure under extreme pressure. These are skills I've applied throughout my military career and in civilian life. And did you apply these skills during your encounter with Officer Reynolds? I did. Even when he became aggressive, I remained calm and non-threatening. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not assault him. Torres turned to face the jury directly. Commander Wilson, based on your training and experience, if you had wanted to harm Officer Reynolds, could you have done so? Objection. Harmon shouted, standing. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, Torres countered, the prosecution has suggested that my client viciously attacked a trained police officer. Her professional capabilities are directly relevant to evaluating the credibility of these claims. Judge Palmer considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Torres. Torres nodded and turned back to Samantha. If I had intended to harm Officer Reynolds, she said calmly, I am trained in multiple combat techniques that would have allowed me to do so effectively. But that was never my intention. My training taught me to defuse situations, not escalate them. Torres nodded, satisfied. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Palmer turned to the prosecution. Mr. Harmon, your cross-examination? Harmon rose slowly, his earlier confidence somewhat diminished. He approached the witness stand, buttoning his suit jacket. Commander Wilson, he began, emphasizing her title with a hint of skepticism, you've presented quite an impressive background. Yet you didn't identify yourself as military personnel to Officer Reynolds during your encounter, did you? I wasn't given the opportunity, Samantha replied evenly. When I attempted to reach for my ID, which would have included my military identification, Officer Reynolds grabbed my arm. Harmon paced in front of the stand. Isn't it possible that Officer Reynolds interpreted your movement toward your purse as a potential threat? No, Samantha said firmly. My movements were slow and deliberate. I verbally stated that I was retrieving my identification. There was nothing threatening about my behavior. Yet Officer Reynolds, with 15 years of experience in threat assessment, felt threatened enough to restrain you, Harmon pressed. Officer Reynolds' actions were not based on any legitimate threat I posed, Samantha countered. They were based on his own assumptions and prejudices. Harmon's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation, Commander Wilson. Are you suggesting Officer Reynolds targeted you because you're a woman? I'm stating that Officer Reynolds acted inappropriately and with excessive force, Samantha replied, and then fabricated charges to justify his actions. Whether that was motivated by gender bias or something else, I can't say with certainty. Harmon tried a different approach. Commander Wilson, you've been trained in combat. Isn't it possible that when Officer Reynolds attempted to restrain you, your military training kicked in reflexively, and you struck him without fully intending to? Samantha's gaze was unwavering. No, Mr. Harmon. My training doesn't kick in reflexively like some action movie cliché. My training gives me control over my body, my reactions, and my decisions. I did not strike Officer Reynolds. Harmon's frustration was becoming evident. He returned to the prosecution table, shuffled through some papers, then turned back to Samantha. No further questions, Your Honor, he finally said, his tone suggesting the battle was far from over. As Samantha returned to her seat beside Torres, the energy in the courtroom had shifted perceptibly. Whispers rustled through the gallery, and several jurors were looking at her with new eyes. Officer Reynolds sat rigidly at the prosecution table, his earlier confidence replaced with visible unease. During the lunch recess, Torres and Samantha sat in a private conference room, sandwiches untouched between them. You were remarkable up there, Torres said, but Harmon will regroup. He's not going to let your testimony stand without a fight. Samantha nodded. I'm counting on it. But there's something else you need to know before we go back in there. Torres leaned forward. What is it? She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. There's a witness, Michael. Someone who recorded part of my encounter with Officer Reynolds on their phone. Torres' eyes widened. Why am I just hearing about this now? This could be game-changing evidence. Because I needed to see Reynolds' testimony first, Samantha explained. I needed him to commit to his version of events under oath. Torres took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it and removed a USB drive. Is this admissible? Why didn't we introduce it during discovery? The witness only came forward yesterday, Samantha said. They were afraid of retaliation from the police department. I had my former military colleague verify the footage's authenticity this morning. It hasn't been altered. Torres stared at the small drive in his palm. This changes everything. Yes, Samantha agreed, her expression solemn. It does. When court reconvened after lunch, the tension in the room was palpable. Judge Palmer called the court to order, and Torres immediately rose. Your Honor, the defense has newly discovered evidence that we would like to present to the court. Judge Palmer raised an eyebrow. Newly discovered evidence, Mr. Torres? In the middle of trial? Yes, Your Honor. A witness came forward yesterday with video evidence of the encounter between Commander Wilson and Officer Reynolds. We've verified its authenticity and are prepared to share it with the court. Harmon was on his feet instantly. Objection, Your Honor. This is completely improper. Any evidence should have been disclosed during discovery. Your Honor, Torres countered, the witness was initially afraid to come forward due to concerns about potential retaliation. They only provided this evidence to my client yesterday, and we've moved as quickly as possible to authenticate it and bring it before the court. Judge Palmer considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll allow it, but I want to see this evidence immediately, and I expect a full explanation of its provenance. Torres presented the USB drive, explaining that it contained cell phone footage taken by a bystander who witnessed the encounter from their apartment window overlooking the street. The court's IT specialist set up the video to play on the large monitor visible to the judge, jury, and entire courtroom. The footage began playing. Although shot from a distance and slightly grainy, the audio was surprisingly clear. Reynolds could be seen approaching Samantha, his flashlight beam directed at her face. Their conversation was audible. What are you doing here? Reynolds' voice demanded. I'm just checking directions on my phone, Samantha's calm reply came through clearly. ID, now. Reynolds' tone was harsh, commanding. May I ask why? I haven't done anything wrong. The video showed Reynolds suddenly grabbing Samantha's arm as she began to reach toward her bag. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Reynolds snapped. I'm not resisting, Samantha's voice remained steady. You're hurting my arm. Then, clearly audible to everyone in the now silent courtroom, came Reynolds' voice. People like you need to learn to respect authority. The footage showed Reynolds roughly turning Samantha around and shoving her against the patrol car, far more aggressively than his testimony had suggested. At no point in the video did Samantha strike him or make any movement toward his weapon. As the video ended, the courtroom erupted into murmurs and gasps. Judge Palmer struck her gavel repeatedly. Order. I will have order in this court. When the room finally quieted, all eyes turned to Officer Reynolds, whose face had drained of color. His fellow officers in the back row shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding looking at him altogether. Judge Palmer's voice cut through the tension. In light of this new evidence, we will take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Harmon, I suggest you use this time to confer with your witness. During the recess, the courthouse hallways buzzed with conversation. Journalists huddled in corners, typing frantically on their phones. Spectators debated in hushed voices what they had just witnessed. And in a small conference room, District Attorney Harmon faced Officer Reynolds across a table. "What the hell was that?" Harmon demanded, his voice low but intense. "That video directly contradicts your testimony." Reynolds' composure had crumbled entirely. He ran a hand over his face, avoiding Harmon's glare. "I didn't know someone was recording. It wasn't supposed to go down like this." "Wasn't supposed to go down like what?" Harmon pressed. "Did you lie under oath, Reynolds? Because that's what it looks like to everyone in that courtroom right now." "I was just doing my job," Reynolds insisted, but the conviction in his voice had vanished. "She was disrespectful, questioning my authority. She was checking her phone." Harmon interrupted. "And now she turns out to be a decorated Army Ranger commander. Do you have any idea how this looks? The department is going to hang you out to dry." Reynolds' shoulders slumped. "What do we do now?" Harmon gathered his papers, his expression grim. "We damage control. But you'd better start thinking about getting yourself a good defense attorney. This isn't over." When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Judge Palmer called Officer Reynolds back to the stand, where Torres conducted his cross-examination with newfound confidence. "Officer Reynolds," Torres began, "having now seen the video evidence, do you wish to revise any part of your earlier testimony?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "The video doesn't show everything that happened before and after that particular moment." "It shows the moment you claimed Commander Wilson assaulted you," Torres pressed. "A moment in which, as everyone in this courtroom can now see, no such assault occurred." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "My recollection of events differs from what the video appears to show." "Your recollection?" Torres repeated incredulously. "Officer Reynolds, this isn't about recollection or interpretation. The video clearly shows you using excessive force against a cooperative civilian and making a statement suggesting bias. It also clearly shows that Commander Wilson never struck you or reached for your weapon. Those weren't errors in recollection, they were deliberate falsehoods told under oath." "Objection," Harmon called. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Overruled," Judge Palmer replied, her tone suggesting her patience with the prosecution was wearing thin. "The witness will answer the question." Reynolds looked cornered. "I stand by my actions that night. I perceived a threat and responded according to my training." Torres approached the witness stand. "Officer Reynolds, are you aware that making false statements under oath constitutes perjury, a felony offense?" Reynolds' face darkened. "I'm aware of the law, counselor." "Then let me ask you directly, did Commander Wilson strike you that night?" A tense silence filled the courtroom. Reynolds finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "No. And did she at any point reach for your service weapon?" Another pause. "No." Torres nodded slowly. "No further questions, Your Honor." The remainder of the trial unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, with Torres methodically dismantling the prosecution's case. He called character witnesses who testified to Samantha's integrity and service record. He presented expert testimony on proper police procedure, highlighting how Reynolds had violated multiple departmental policies during the encounter. But perhaps most damaging to the prosecution was what Torres revealed next: Officer Reynolds' personnel file, which showed a pattern of complaints about excessive force and biased treatment, particularly toward women. These complaints had been systematically downplayed or buried by the department. "Your Honor," Torres argued during his closing statement, "what we've seen in this courtroom is not just about one night or one encounter. It's about a systemic failure that allowed an officer with a history of misconduct to remain on the force, to continue abusing his power, and ultimately to bring false charges against a woman whose only crime was asking why she was being detained." He turned to face the jury directly. "Commander Samantha Wilson has spent her career defending the very freedoms that Officer Reynolds so casually violated. She has led troops in combat, made split-second decisions under fire, and upheld the highest standards of integrity and honor. The idea that she would suddenly attack a police officer on a quiet street is not just improbable, as the video evidence proves, it's impossible." Torres returned to his seat beside Samantha, who gave him a small nod of approval. Harmon's closing argument seemed hollow in comparison, his earlier confidence replaced by a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of the case. When the jury retired to deliberate, few in the courtroom expected them to be gone long. Indeed, they returned after just 90 minutes, their verdict unanimous, not guilty on all charges. But the jury didn't stop there. In an unusual move, the foreperson delivered a statement recommending a full investigation into Officer Reynolds' conduct and the department's handling of previous complaints against him. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Samantha, microphones thrust toward her face. "Commander Wilson, how do you feel about the verdict?" Samantha stood tall, the afternoon sun illuminating her face. "Today isn't just about me," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that the power entrusted to law enforcement is used with integrity and respect for the citizens they're sworn to protect." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I fought for this country because I believe in justice. Today, justice was served, but the fight continues. For every person who has been wrongfully accused, for every voice that has been silenced, we must demand better." As the crowd erupted in applause, a reporter called out one last question: "What would you say to Officer Reynolds now?" Samantha's expression softened slightly. "I would say what I've always believed: the truth has a way of revealing itself. Always." In the months that followed, the case had far-reaching consequences. Officer Reynolds was dismissed from the force and faced charges of perjury and filing false reports. An independent investigation into the police department revealed a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups, leading to significant reforms and leadership changes. Samantha returned to her quiet life, declining numerous interview requests and book offers. But her name became synonymous with standing up against injustice, and she eventually agreed to speak at police academies about ethics and accountability in law enforcement. As for Torres, the young public defender who had initially doubted his ability to win against the system, he found himself inundated with new clients and job offers from prestigious law firms. But he chose to remain in public defense, inspired by the case that had reminded him why he became a lawyer in the first place. On the one-year anniversary of the verdict, Torres received a small package at his office. Inside was a medallion bearing the Army Rangers motto, "Rangers lead the way." The accompanying note, in Samantha's precise handwriting, read simply, "Sometimes justice needs warriors in courtrooms, not just on battlefields. Keep fighting the good fight. SW." The story of Commander Samantha Wilson and Officer Darnell Reynolds became more than just a local courtroom drama. It became a powerful reminder that courage comes in many forms, that truth can prevail against overwhelming odds, and that sometimes, the most important battles for justice are fought not on distant battlefields, but in the quiet dignity of standing firm for what's right. That day in court, a decorated commander taught everyone a powerful lesson about integrity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Her victory wasn't just for herself, it was for everyone who has ever faced injustice and found the strength to stand against it. If this story moved you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful tale of justice and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and join me next time as we explore more extraordinary stories of ordinary people standing up against incredible odds. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.